The day she arrived. The Carrington mansion stood tall at the edge of the city, its white walls shining under the morning sun, but inside, the air felt heavy, as if the house itself carried a secret it could not share. The long driveway was lined with trimmed hedges, and fountains sprayed water into the air, but the beauty outside could not hide the silence within. Amara Johnson stood at the front gates, holding her small suitcase in one hand and a letter of employment in the other. She was 22, from a small town far away, and had never seen a house this big in her life. Her heart beat fast, not only from the excitement of a new job, but also from the nervousness of stepping into the unknown. A tall man in a black suit opened the gate and led her inside. His voice was polite but cold. "Follow me," he said. His shoes clicked on the marble floors as they walked through the grand hallway. The air smelled faintly of roses, and expensive paintings covered the walls. Amara looked around in quiet awe, but noticed something strange. There were no sounds of laughter, no footsteps running, no signs of life beyond the staff moving quietly. The butler stopped and spoke in a lower voice. "You will be cleaning the east wing and doing laundry for the family. You will not enter certain rooms unless asked, and—" He paused, looking at her with serious eyes. "Do not disturb the boy." "The boy?" Amara asked softly, but he did not answer. He simply turned and continued walking. As they reached the east wing, Amara noticed the curtains here were drawn shut. The air felt cooler, heavier. The butler pointed to her small room at the end of the hallway and then left. Amara unpacked quickly and began her work. She dusted shelves, polished tables, and folded clothes. But as she worked, she couldn't stop wondering about the boy the butler had mentioned. Who was he? Why was she told? Not to disturb him? Hours passed and the mansion stayed quiet. Amara was wiping a window when she saw movement in the garden below. She looked down and saw a young man in a wheelchair. His hair was dark, his skin pale, and his eyes, they were fixed on the horizon. He didn't move much, only his hands rested on the wheels of his chair. He seemed deep in thought, or maybe far away from the world around him. She watched for a moment, but when his head turned slightly in her direction, she quickly looked away. Her heart beat faster for reasons she couldn't explain. Later in the afternoon, Amara went to the laundry room. A few maids were folding clothes and whispering to each other. She caught bits of their conversation. "They say he's never walked in his life," one maid said, shaking her head. "Doctors, specialists, nothing worked," another replied. "The master spent millions, but nothing could be done." "Poor boy," the first one whispered. "He barely speaks, doesn't look at anyone. Some say he's given up." Amara listened quietly, not saying a word, but inside, she felt a strange pull of curiosity and sadness. She wanted to know more. By evening, she had finished her tasks. She stepped into the hallway and paused. Somewhere in the east wing, she heard the faint sound of a piano playing. The notes were slow, almost like someone was learning a song for the first time. She followed the sound until it led her to a closed door. She knew she shouldn't, but she pressed her ear to the wood. The music stopped, and in the silence she heard something else, a quiet, shaky sound. Someone was crying. The sound was so soft it almost didn't seem real, but it made her chest feel tight. She stepped back, her hand on the doorknob, debating whether to knock. But before she could decide, footsteps echoed down the hallway. The butler appeared, his face stern. "You should be in your room," he said. Amara nodded quickly and walked away, but her thoughts stayed with the person inside that room. The boy who had never walked, the one the staff avoided speaking about. That night, as she lay in her small bed, she stared at the ceiling. The mansion's silence pressed in around her. Somewhere, not too far away, was a young man who had been locked in his world for years, and for reasons she could not explain, she felt that her arrival here was not just for cleaning and serving, but for something much greater. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window. And in the east wing, a pair of tired eyes stared into the darkness, unaware that change had just walked through the Carrington gates, the wall between them. The morning light crept through the heavy curtains of the east wing, but inside Ethan Carrington's room, the shadows remained. He sat in his wheelchair near the window, staring out at the garden below. His pale hands rested on the armrests, unmoving. His eyes were fixed on the world outside, yet it seemed like he was looking far beyond it. Down the hall, Amara Johnson carried a basket of clean linens. She had been working in the mansion for 3 days now. but she still had not spoken to Ethan. The butler's warning echoed in her mind. Do not disturb the boy. But every time she passed by his closed door, she felt an invisible pull, as if something inside was calling to her. At breakfast in the staff dining area, she heard more whispers. Ethan hasn't left that room in weeks, one maid said quietly. I heard he only eats when the butler brings his meals, another replied. Why does Mr. Carrington never visit his son? Amara asked before she could stop herself. The table went silent for a moment, then an older maid leaned closer. Because the boy reminds him of everything he lost. No one said more, but the sadness in their eyes told Amara there was more to the story. Later that afternoon, Amara was told to clean the east wing again. She moved quietly, dusting and polishing, until she reached the door to Ethan's room. It was slightly open, her heart beat faster. She hesitated, then pushed it gently. Ethan was there, exactly as she had seen from the garden. Dark hair, pale skin, eyes distant. He looked up, startled, and for a moment their eyes met. His gaze was sharp, cold, but also filled with something she could not name. What do you want? He asked, his voice low. I'm just here to change the sheets, she replied softly. I don't need your help, he said, turning his wheelchair slightly away from her. Most people would have left, but Amara didn't. She walked in and began working quietly, dusting the shelves and replacing the linens. She could feel his eyes on her, watching, maybe wondering why she wasn't afraid of him like the others. As she moved around the room, she noticed something strange. When she accidentally dropped a pillow onto the floor, Ethan's legs twitched. Just for a second. It was small, almost invisible, but she saw it. She pretended not to notice, but inside her mind the thought burned. He can move. The rest of the day passed without another word between them, but Amara's curiosity had grown into determination. She wanted to know why he stayed locked away. She wanted to know why no one seemed to believe in him. That night, as she returned from the laundry room, she saw a light under Ethan's door. The sound of a pen scratching against paper came from inside. She stood there for a moment listening until she heard him sigh, a deep, heavy sound of someone carrying too much weight. Suddenly the door opened, and there he was, staring at her. His eyes narrowed. Do you make it a habit to spy on people? He asked. Amara straightened. No, I was just passing by. Then keep passing, he said, his voice cold, and he closed the door sharply. As she walked back to her room, Amara felt something shift inside her. She was no longer just curious. She was determined to break whatever wall Ethan had built around himself. The next morning she greeted him when she passed his room. He didn't answer, but she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but not the same cold stare either. The staff whispered about her. She's wasting her time. He doesn't talk to anyone. But Amara ignored them. She believed that walls could be broken, even the tallest ones. And deep inside the east wing, Ethan Carrington sat in his wheelchair staring at the closed door. His mind told him to keep the maid out, but his heart was starting to wonder what would happen if he didn't. The first spark. The fourth morning after Amara's arrival began like all the others. The sky was painted in soft gold, the mansion quiet except for the distant hum of the kitchen. Amara carried a tray of tea and warm bread toward the east wing. She was not told to bring it, but something in her heart told her that Ethan needed it. When she pushed the door open slightly, Ethan was sitting at his desk, a book in his lap. He didn't look up. I brought you breakfast, she said gently. I didn't ask for it, he replied without turning his head. You don't have to ask, she answered, setting the tray down. She began tidying his room, dusting the bookshelf and straightening the curtains. Ethan closed his book slowly. Why do you keep coming here? He asked. Because you're here, she said simply. Her voice carried no pity, just honesty. Ethan's eyes studied her for a moment as if trying to decide if she was joking. Then he shook his head, turning away. But for the first time, he didn't tell her to leave. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Amara was carrying a small tray with tea when her foot caught on the edge of the carpet. The porcelain cup slid off and clattered to the floor, hot tea spilling across the polished wood. Without thinking, she bent to clean it. Careful, Ethan said sharply. Hi. His wheelchair jerked forward as he moved closer. In that moment, Amara saw it again. A flicker of muscle movement in his right leg, small but unmistakable. She froze for a second, her mind racing. If his legs could move even a little, it meant something. It meant that all hope wasn't gone. Ethan noticed her staring. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quickly, hiding the truth for now. She cleaned the mess and left, her thoughts buzzing. In the days that followed, Amara began talking to Ethan more. She told him small stories about her hometown, about her younger brother who could never sit still. She didn't ask him questions about his life. She didn't force him to speak. But slowly, he began to answer in short sentences, sometimes even with the hint of dry humor. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, she found him sketching in a notebook. "That's good," she said, leaning closer to see. "It's not," he muttered, turning the page. "It is," she insisted, "and I don't say things I don't mean." He gave her a sideways glance as if testing her words. That night, as Amara returned to her room, she thought about the small moments they'd shared. The spark she'd seen in his eyes today wasn't there before. It was faint, almost hidden, but it was there. The next morning she brought a small jar of homemade jam she had bought with her own money from a shop in town. "Try this," she said, placing it on his desk. He looked at it and frowned. "You bought this for me?" "Yes," she said. "You don't have to like it, but I think you will." He hesitated before opening the jar, spreading a little on bread, and taking a bite. His expression didn't change much, but he ate the whole slice. "You talk too much," he said after a while. "And you talk too little," she replied without missing a beat. For a moment, the corner of his lips curved up, almost a smile. Later that evening, Amara stood outside in the garden looking up at the night sky. She thought about Ethan, about the walls around him, about the way he had begun to look at her differently. There was something in him, locked away, and she was beginning to believe she might be the one to find the key. In his room, Ethan sat in the quiet, staring at the jar of jam on his desk. He had told himself not to care, not to let anyone in, but somehow, without even trying, the new maid had begun to push against the walls he had built for years. It was only a flicker, a small change, but in that mansion full of silence, even the smallest spark was enough to start a fire. The challenge. The next few days in the Carrington mansion passed quietly, but Amara had a plan forming in her mind. She had seen the small movement in Ethan's leg more than once, and now she was sure his body still had strength even if his mind refused to believe it. She decided she would not tell him what she had noticed. Instead, she would make him use his legs without realizing it. On a sunny morning, she came into his room carrying a basket of folded clothes. "Can you help me for a second?" she asked casually. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Help you? How?" "Just hold this shirt while I get the rest," she said, handing him the item. Then as she reached for another, she let a small towel drop onto the floor. Right next to his foot, she pretended not to see it, moving around the room as if it didn't matter. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw his legs shift slightly, his toes curling inside his slipper. But when he noticed her watching, he froze. Later, she began arranging his books on a shelf, placing them just a little lower than usual so he would have to lean forward to reach them. At first, he avoided touching them, but one afternoon, she returned to find a book in his lap, one from the lower shelf. The real test came one rainy afternoon. Amara had been carrying fresh flowers to his room when Richard Carrington himself appeared at the doorway. His tall frame filled the space, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "What are you doing here?" Richard asked, his voice cool. "Delivering flowers," Amara said. Richard glanced at his son, then back at her. "Don't give him ideas, Miss Johnson. We've had enough false hope in this house." The words stung, but Amara kept her face calm. She didn't argue. She simply placed the flowers on Ethan's desk and left. But inside, she felt her resolve harden. She would prove to both of them that Ethan was not as broken as they believed. The following day, she found Ethan sitting near the window as always. His hands rested on the armrests of his wheelchair, his gaze fixed outside. "Do you ever get bored of that view?" she asked. "It's better than people," he replied. "I think people can surprise you," she said, leaning on the window frame. "But you have to give them a chance." He glanced at her briefly. "And what if I don't want to?" "Then you'll never know what you're missing," she answered. For the next week, Amara turned her small tests into part of his daily routine. She would place objects just slightly out of his reach, ask him to pass her things from low tables, or set his tea tray a little farther than usual. Each time she saw small signs, a leg shifting, a knee bending, a foot pressing against the floor. One evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, Amara entered the room to find Ethan staring at an old photograph on the desk. It was of a woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. "My mother," he said quietly, surprising her. "She used to sit here and read to me when I was little." "She looks kind," Amara replied softly. "She was," he said, his voice almost breaking. Then he turned away, closing himself off again. But that night, as Amara walked back to her room, she knew something had shifted. He had shared a piece of himself, small but real. The next day, during an argument about her interference, Ethan's voice grew louder, his hands gripping the armrest tightly. And that's when it happened. His right foot pressed hard against the floor, pushing the wheelchair back slightly. Amara saw it. He didn't. She smiled to herself, not saying a word, but she knew the wall between them was cracking. And soon, something far greater than she imagined would happen. The unthinkable moment. The day began quietly, heavy clouds covering the sky like a thick gray blanket. Inside the Carrington mansion, the air felt just as heavy. Ethan sat in his usual spot by the window, a sketchbook in his lap. Amara entered with a basket of freshly washed clothes, her mind unusually restless. She had been waiting for the right moment, and she felt it might be today. She moved around the room, folding clothes and humming softly. Ethan kept glancing at her, though he didn't say a word. On his desk, the framed photograph of his mother sat in its usual place, untouched for years. Amara had noticed the way he sometimes looked at it when he thought no one was watching. As she dusted the shelves, she accidentally bumped into the desk. The photograph wobbled, slid, and then fell, landing face down under a small table across the room. Ethan's eyes snapped to it instantly. His breathing quickened, his hands tightening around the armrests of his wheelchair. Amara froze in place, watching him. "It's under the table," she said softly. "I can get it for you." "No," he said sharply, his voice low but firm. "I'll get it." For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's gaze locked on the photo, his jaw tightening. Slowly he placed his hands on the edge of the wheelchair. His arms trembled as he pushed against it. His legs, unused for so long, felt heavy and weak, but something deep inside him refused to let go of the chance. Amara didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan shifted forward, his right foot pressing to the floor. His body swayed, his knees shook. Then, with a low grunt of effort, he rose. The movement was clumsy, unsteady, but he was standing. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of his uneven breathing. Ethan's eyes widened as if even he couldn't believe what was happening. Slowly, painfully, he took one shaky step forward, then another. His legs trembled, but they held him. By the time he reached the table, his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the photo as he picked it up. He stood there clutching it to his chest, his eyes glassy. "I told you," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "You're stronger than you think." His knees buckled, and before he could fall, Amara was there catching him. She helped him back into the wheelchair, her own eyes wet with tears. For a moment, they just stared at each other, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. Unseen by either of them, someone stood in the doorway. Richard Carrington's tall frame cast a shadow across the floor. His usual stern expression was frozen in disbelief. His son had just done something every doctor had said was impossible. Ethan noticed him then, but instead of the cold distance that always stood between them, there was something new in his father's eyes. Shock, yes, but also hope. Richard stepped forward slowly, his voice low. You walked." Ethan looked away, unsure how to respond. Amara remained silent, letting the moment belong to them. Richard swallowed hard, his eyes shifting to her. "How did you—" "I didn't," Amara said quickly. "He did it himself." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the cold, empty silence of the past. It was the heavy, meaningful quiet of something changing. That night, after the mansion had gone still, Ethan sat alone in his room, the photograph of his mother resting beside him. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, the fear, the trembling, the pain, and then the unbelievable truth: he had walked. In her small room at the end of the hallway, Amara lay awake, her lips curved into a faint smile. She knew this was only the beginning. The walls around Ethan's heart were crumbling, and once they were gone, nothing would be the same. The day the house changed, the Carrington mansion had never felt so alive. Word of what happened in the East Wing had spread quietly among the staff. Whispers followed Amara in the hallways, eyes wide with disbelief. Some smiled, some shook their heads, but all of them knew. Ethan Carrington had taken steps, something no one thought would happen again. That morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Its light filled Ethan's room, warming the air. Amara walked in carrying his breakfast, her usual calm smile in place. "You slept well?" she asked. "Better than I have in years," he admitted, a faint spark in his eyes. They ate together in the quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one felt lighter, filled with unspoken hope. Around midday, Richard Carrington appeared at the door. He looked different, still the commanding man he had always been, but there was something softer in his eyes. "Ethan," he said, his voice lower than usual, "would you try again? This time in front of everyone." Ethan stiffened. "I'm not ready." "You are," Richard said firmly, "and I want them to see it." Within the hour, the household staff gathered in the main hall. The marble floors gleamed, and the high windows let in golden light. Ethan's wheelchair was positioned near the center. Amara stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. Tea. The room was so quiet that the sound of the grandfather clock seemed loud. Ethan's eyes scanned the faces around him. The butler, the maids, the cooks, all watching, waiting. He gripped the armrests, his chest rising and falling in deep, steady breaths. Amara leaned closer, whispering, "Don't think about them. Think about your mother. Think about the photograph. Think about how far you've come." He nodded slowly, then pushed himself up. His legs trembled, but they held. A collective gasp rose from the room. Richard stepped forward, his hands half raised as if ready to catch him. But he didn't. He let his son stand on his own. Ethan took one step, then another. Each movement was slow, heavy, but deliberate. The staff began to whisper in awe, some covering their mouths, others holding back tears. When he reached the center of the hall, he stopped, breathing hard. The butler's voice broke the silence. "Sir, he's walking." Richard's jaw tightened, but his eyes shone. He stepped forward, clapping once, a sharp, proud sound that echoed in the hall. Then the others joined in, the sound growing until it filled the space. Ethan's hands shook, but a faint smile touched his lips. Amara stood beside him, her own eyes wet. She had never seen him look so alive, so present, so free. Afterwards, Richard approached her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You've done something no doctor, no treatment, no amount of money could do." Amara shook her head. "No, Mr. Carrington, I didn't make him walk. I just made him believe he could." That evening, the mansion felt different. Laughter returned to the hallways. Doors that had stayed closed for years were open. In the garden, Ethan sat in a chair, not a wheelchair, sketching as the warm light faded. Amara passed by, and he looked up. "You know," he said quietly, "you didn't just make me walk. You made me live." She smiled. Her heart full. In that moment, she knew her time at the Carrington mansion had been more than a job. It had been a chapter in both their lives that neither of them would forget.